A storm began as a silent bruise upon the firmament, a dark smear against the blood-red horizon of a dying imperial world. Within moments, it swelled into a cosmic wound, tearing open the sky with a violence that defied reason. Lightning without sound rippled outward in jagged veins, each bolt carrying the taste of raw madness. Clouds folded into themselves, stretched thin, and bled colors no mortal spectrum had ever held. Above the hive spires and shattered manufactorums, reality twisted as if gripped by unseen hands, bending and reshaping until the heavens resembled liquid glass under the pressure of some ancient will. Before we descend into the chaos of this tale, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more legends and dark histories from the Warhammer 40K universe. Below, the once thriving world trembled beneath the storm's awakening. Entire city blocks flickered with unstable light as the warp bled into the physical realm. Machinery groaned in distress, their machine spirits wailing through vox systems that crackled with static and distorted prayer. Sirens struggled to form coherent warnings, their tones warping into a low, mournful drone that drifted across the hive like a funeral bell carried on toxic wind. The air itself grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and metallic dust, pressing down upon soldiers and civilians alike until breathing felt like an act of rebellion. Imperial forces, weary from months of unending conflict, raised their eyes to the storm's opening with grim resignation. Many had seen rifts like this before, heralding warp-spawned horrors that would soon claw their way onto the battlefield. Vox chatter fractured into fearful murmurs as officers attempted to impose order upon their trembling ranks. Psykers collapsed to their knees, clutching at their skulls as visions of shifting silhouettes and whispering voids tore through their minds. Even the battle-hardened felt it, a primal instinct warning them that something unprecedented was descending through the rift. The heart of the storm expanded in a slow, deliberate pulse, like the breath of a slumbering titan waking after eons. Each contraction drew the sky inward, distorting stars and smearing constellations into spiraling ribbons of light. Each expansion cast waves of pressure across the atmosphere, rattling shattered windowpanes and causing dust to cascade from towering hab blocks. Then, through the swirling mass of impossible colors, a small speck emerged, falling not with the chaos of debris, but with the poise of something guided by purpose. The object accelerated, cutting through the storm's turbulence with unnatural grace. Trails of shimmering energy curled around its descent, forming delicate spirals that defied the surrounding violence. For a heartbeat, it appeared as little more than a streak of silver against the bruised sky. Then the storm's light struck it at the right angle, revealing a silhouette that did not belong to demon or machine. Long limbs shaped by elegance rather than brutality, curves framed by shadows rather than armor, the outline of a figure descending as though stepping between realms with calm certainty. Below, the world reacted with a collective gasp, senses straining to understand what approached. The figure did not tumble or spin, but descended with a serenity that contrasted sharply with the storm's fury. Warp lightning slid across an unseen barrier around the falling form, bending away like water repelled by oil. As the descent quickened, the air thrummed around it, building into a low vibration that rolled across rooftops and trembled through the bones of those who watched with widening eyes. The impact came not as a catastrophic explosion, but as a deep, resonant thud, a pulse that rippled through Ferrocrete streets and sent a wave of dust spiraling upward. Seconds later, the storm overhead began to contract, its colors dimming as though exhausted by the effort of delivering this single presence into the material plane. As the light faded, all that remained was a crater carved into the heart of the Manufactorum ruins, still steaming from the descent. And at its center, rising slowly from settling smoke, stood a figure neither imperial nor demon, her arrival marking the beginning of a change none could yet comprehend. The air around her shifted with quiet expectation, carrying the first breath of a new and unfamiliar power across the broken landscape. The crater still breathed out curls of heat as the figure at its center unfolded with unhurried grace. The ruins around her whispered under the weight of settling dust, fractured metal beams groaning as if unsure how to respond to the presence now standing among them. The wreckage of the industrial spire, once proud and towering, leaned in jagged silhouettes, their shadows cast long across the scorched ground. Amid this graveyard of steel and stone, the Umbra Witch rose, untouched by the violence of her arrival. Bayonetta straightened with delicate precision, one hand lifting to brush aside a stray fleck of ash clinging to her hair. The motion carried a quiet confidence, a rhythmic cadence that contrasted with the broken world around her. Her attire, woven of demonic elegance and shadowed silk, shimmered faintly as the last embers of the warp storm's energy danced along its surface. Each ember faded upon contact, repelled as though the storm itself recognized a force older and far less willing to bend. She stepped forward, heels striking cracked ferrocrete with the soft certainty of someone who had walked through countless realms and feared none of them. Her posture remained poised, spine straight, shoulders relaxed, as if she had simply arrived fashionably late to an appointment rather than fallen from a cosmic rift into a war-torn empire. Smoke curled around her ankles in slow spirals, drawn to her presence like living things seeking the warmth of a flame. A faint breeze drifted through the ruins, carrying with it the heavy scent of promethium and burnt metal. It stirred loose strands of her hair, brushing them lightly across her cheek. She surveyed the shattered manufactorum with a calm, scholarly curiosity, taking in every detail with eyes that glowed softly beneath the rising dust. There was no hint of fear in her gaze, only interest, as though the devastation merely added texture to an already intriguing world. The warped sky above flickered between crimson and violet as the last remnants of the storm receded. Its dying light caught the contours of her silhouette, casting long, fluid shadows across debris-strewn pathways. Her focus lingered on the horizon, studying the colossal hive structures that pierced the clouds like obsidian needles. Their brutal architecture carried none of the grace or artistry of her own world's creations, yet something about their unyielding presence pulled at her attention with subtle fascination. Around her, the landscape groaned with distant conflict. The low thunder of artillery rolled from somewhere deep within the hive's silhouette, punctuated by the hollow echo of collapsing metal. None of it unsettled her. Every sound flowed into her awareness like the quiet prelude of a symphony she had yet to hear in full. The rustle of distant servitors, the muffled cries of scattered soldiers, the pulse of unfamiliar energies flickering in the air, all layered into an intricate rhythm that she deciphered effortlessly. Her footfalls carried her up the crater's edge, each step measured and unhurried. Ribbons of warp residue clung to the ground, fading only when her presence brushed past. She paused at the top, allowing her gaze to sweep across the war-torn district with growing interest. There was a strange charm hidden beneath the grime and ruin, a silent history etched into every cracked surface and scorched beam. A world ruled by devotion, stained by conflict, yet driven by an iron resolve that shimmered faintly beneath the chaos. Something stirred at the edge of her perception, a distant cluster of human minds approaching with caution and fear. She caught their presence the way one might sense a faint tremor beneath the earth, subtle yet distinct. Instead of preparing for battle, she allowed a small, knowing smile to touch her lips, the expression softening the sharp lines of the destroyed landscape around her. This place was broken, hostile, and violent, yet undeniably captivating. Her arrival had been an intrusion, but her interest was genuine, and it lingered like a quiet promise that her presence here would shape more than the dust beneath her feet. The air shifted first, rippling with a low vibration that tremored through the ferrocrete under Bayonetta's heels. The ruins around her grew still, as though holding a collective breath. Dust settled in uneasy spirals, drifting toward the seams of shadow where the manufactorum's shattered walls leaned inward like broken ribs. From deep within those fractures came a whisper, faint yet malignant, a sound without breath that crawled through the debris like a parasite seeking form. Bayonetta paused, her posture still fluid, head tilting with a quiet curiosity as she sensed minds twisted far beyond mortal comprehension. The warp residue clinging to the atmosphere thickened, its presence tightening around the district like unseen fingers pulling taut a veil that should never have been touched. Light dimmed, not from any cloud or passing shadow, but from something deeper, as though the world itself recoiled from the shapes beginning to push their way into reality. Metal groaned with unnatural stress, pipes trembling as they expanded and contracted under temperatures that defied physics. Then, in the farthest corner where darkness pooled deepest, a fissure tore open and bled pale luminescence onto the fractured floor. Shapes emerged one by one, dragging themselves from the tier with limbs formed not of flesh but of malice. Their bodies twisted into impossible configurations, ribcage protruding like serrated blades, eyes floating freely above their disfigured skulls. They moved without rhythm, jerking forward with spasms that allowed no clear intent until they all paused in unison, heads tilting as one toward the witch who now stood at the crater's lip. No breath filled their lungs. No heart beat within their misshapen forms. They existed only to kill, fueled by a hunger that echoed the warp's most feral instincts. The first creature lunged with a guttural hiss, dragging itself across the rubble with elongated claws that carved furrows into the ferricrete. Bayonetta watched the approach, calm and observant, her body neither braced nor tense. The monster fell upon her position with a force that cracked the ground beneath it. But when the dust rose, the witch remained untouched, having stepped aside with the lightness of a shadow caught in morning breeze. The demon wheeled toward her, its fractured jaw splitting wider as more of its kin crawled free from the warp fissure. Their numbers swelled, filling the ruins with a chorus of gurgling screams. Some slithered across walls, others advanced on taloned limbs, each movement carrying the uncoordinated frenzy of creatures born from nightmares rather than nature. Bayonetta moved through their encroaching circle with a measured ease, studying their forms as though encountering new species in an artist's gallery. Their aggression amused her, not for its threat but for its rawness, a kind of primal violence that lacked the elegance of her usual foes. The largest among them dragged itself upright, towering over the others with a torso that writhed beneath layers of pulsating sinew. Its presence pressed against the air like a physical weight, warping the space around it with a distorted gravity. It roared, a sound like tearing metal carried through a hollow cathedral. The lesser creatures answered with shrieks, converging upon her with claws raised, each intent on shredding the intruder who dared stand in their corrupted domain. Bayonetta met their charge with stillness, fingers lifting toward the weapons holstered along her legs, not in fear but in anticipation. The air thickened, the world slowed, and in the breath before violence reached her, time began to bend. The moment stretched thin, drawn out into a fragile thread that trembled between seconds. The world around her fractured into fractured hues of violet and silver, colors shimmering at the edge of perception as time bent to her will. Bayonetta's movement stilled, not from paralysis but from deliberate poise, as the universe shifted into that familiar slow-turning dance she knew as witch time. Every motion beyond her own became syrup-thick and distant, each demon suspended mid-lunge like grotesque sculptures carved from congealed darkness. The nearest creature's claws hovered inches from her chest, frozen in a pose that captured its murderous intent with chilling clarity. Droplets of viscous warp fluid hung in the air around its maw, shimmering like tarnished gemstones. Even the ambient dust stalled, forming soft spirals that rotated with agonizing slowness. The entire Manufactorum district appeared submerged in a sea of muted sound, silence wrapping the scene in a cocoon of unnatural calm. Bayonetta breathed in, feeling the luxury of perfect awareness settle into her body like a second skin. She stepped into motion with measured precision. Her foot glided across the fractured ground, heels clicking against stone with musical clarity, each sound amplified in the stillness. Her right arm lifted in a gentle arc, fingers brushing the handle of one of her guns with an affectionate familiarity. Her body twisted with the elegance of a dancer mid-performance, hair swirling around her like dark silk carried by invisible wind. In this slowed world, her form remained fluid, shifting between poses with effortless command of tempo. Her weapon fired once, a soft burst against the near-silent air. The bullet spun lazily at first, carving lines of displaced dust as it cut through the stalled moment. As it traveled, it passed the demonic claw still frozen midair, then sliced through the creature's jaw with a whisper-like grace. Only fragments of impact echoed within which time, faint and distant, like percussion from another room. She pivoted, firing again and again, each bullet weaving through the stillness in arcs of perfect geometry. The warped air trembled as her actions rippled across the frozen scene. One creature, massive and serpentine, attempted a sluggish swipe with its elongated limb. She moved beneath the attack, bending low with the smooth fluidity of water cascading down stone. Her hand traced a subtle gesture across its chest, marking its position, calculating where it would be once time resumed. Another demon lunged from her right, its maw split open far too wide to hold shape. She pirouetted past it, a ribbon of her hair flowing dangerously close to its jagged teeth. Which time continued its slow pulse, granting her absolute dominion over the battlefield. Even the storm's lingering energies stilled above her, flickering like candle flames caught in glass. The colossal demon that towered at the rear of the pack attempted a roar, but only the faintest tremor escaped its throat, a ghost of violence that never formed fully. Bayonetta traced her gaze across each opponent, reading their malformed anatomy, their warped strengths, their predictable savagery. None of it stirred fear. Only calculation, curiosity, and a quiet thrill. When she shifted into her final stance, the world around her remained trapped in the slowed dance, waiting, trembling. Her arms extended, her body angled with predatory precision, her weapons aligned in a deadly silhouette. Which time began to thin, rippling at the edges as the universe sought to reclaim its rhythm. The creature's movements trembled, desperate to return to their assault. She heard the first crackle of normal speed creeping back into the air, a soft rumble of reality returning. Then time snapped into motion. Claws completed their arcs too late, roars erupted midair only to collapse into broken gurgles, and bullets fired moments earlier tore through demonic forms with perfect synchronization. The entire pack staggered under a simultaneous wave of destruction, bodies splitting apart in showers of corrupted ichor. Bayonetta stood calmly at their center, untouched, as which time released its final shimmer and dissolved from the air in a soft sigh. The battlefield responded with sudden stillness, broken only by the hiss of steaming blood pooling across shattered stone. And through that silence came the next tremor, signaling creatures far stronger than these beginning to claw their way into reality. The weakened demons collapsed in ruined heaps, but their deaths only stirred a deeper presence within the corrupted landscape. The air thickened again, this time with an oppressive weight that settled across the Manufactorum ruins like a heavy mantle. Shadows twisted at the edges of Bayonetta's vision, converging into violent shapes that carried far more intent than the lesser creatures she had dispatched moments earlier. The warp fissure pulsed with renewed ferocity, its aperture stretching wider, as if welcoming champions born from the darkest corners of the immaterium. The ground quaked beneath her heels as the first of the greater horrors emerged, its body dragging itself forward with the authority of a creature accustomed to domination. Massive limbs formed from molten bone and muscle unfurled, tethered by strands of warp matter that writhed like veins beneath translucent skin. Its head rose last, crowned with jagged protrusions that smoldered with infernal heat. In its wake followed two more, each configured in grotesque symmetry, their forms shifting with every labored breath they expelled. Bayonetta felt their oppressive malice washing over her in waves, yet her expression remained poised, her gaze soft with curiosity rather than concern. She stepped forward, her hips swaying with deliberate rhythm, every motion resonant with confidence born of battles across countless realms. The towering demon bellowed with a force that rippled through the shattered spire, scattering debris in wide arcs. Its roar carried such density that nearby metal beams bent under the sound alone. The witch lifted her right hand, palm open, allowing the remnants of witch time's shimmer to slide from her fingertips like fading starlight. Her hair began to stir in a slow spiral, moving not with the wind but with an energy that pulsed from her body like the heartbeat of a sleeping titan. The air behind her deepened into a shadow dense enough to swallow light, an expanding silhouette that shifted with graceful menace. The first demon lunged, its massive arm raised like a falling monolith. Bayonetta did not evade. Instead, she extended her will into the shadows behind her, and the air erupted with the emergence of a colossal feminine hand made of swirling black hair and infernal fire. The wicked weave clenched into a fist larger than hab-block pillars, slamming into the demon's torso with a force that shattered its ribcage on impact. The creature flew backward, crashing into a distant wall that crumbled under its weight. The others responded with frenzied aggression, surging toward her with synchronized ferocity. She turned with smooth elegance, her body spinning into a balletic twist as another weave manifested, this time a massive heel carved from hair and demonic energy. It swung downward in a sweeping arc, striking the second demon across the head. Its skull imploded beneath the force, sending its body collapsing in a convulsing heap. The third creature attempted to flank her, its claws infused with warpfire crackling in jagged lines across the ground. Bayonetta stepped back with calm precision, watching as the creature's claws scraped the ground where she had stood moments before. Her stance shifted, arms opening wide as the shadow behind her twisted upward into the semblance of a towering feminine silhouette. Wicked weaves thickened around her, braiding into limbs that ripped through space with violent elegance. A final strike echoed across the ruins, the sound deep and resonant, as a massive kick composed of swirling hair crushed the demon's spine. The impact sent tremors through the battlefield, scattering shattered armor fragments across the district like smoldering ashes. As the monsters dissolved into warp vapor, a lingering silence settled around her, broken only by the soft cascade of drifting dust. Her hair fell back into place with a gentle rustle. The air calmed for a fleeting moment, giving her a brief breath before the next shift in the world's energy signaled that she was no longer the only one watching the carnage she had wrought. Far above the Manufactorum ruins, buried deep within the armored bastion that served as the Hive's command center, a dimly lit chamber thrummed beneath a storm of conflicting data. Auspex screens flickered with distorted images, Vox channels crackled beneath layers of static, and servitors chattered in monotone streams as they attempted to reconcile readings that defied any established imperial classification. Officers crowded around a primary display, the projection shimmering with aberrant signatures that pulsed like the heartbeat of a slumbering god. The command center smelled of machine oil and stale incense, the remnants of countless rituals performed to soothe the fragile spirits of the equipment. Cogitator banks lined the walls, their red lenses blinking nervously as if sharing the fear of the humans operating them. A low hum filled the air, punctuated by the occasional groan of the structure as distant artillery impacts shook the hive. Yet none of these disturbances commanded as much attention as the anomaly blooming across the central display. The first readings had appeared moments after the warp fissure began stabilizing, a spike of energy so intense that it overwhelmed the detection arrays. Psykers assigned to the command staff collapsed instantly, convulsing beneath visions of swirling silhouettes and graceful movements cutting through a storm of unreality. Their warnings came in shattered whispers, describing a presence descending through the warp with poise instead of violence, intention instead of hunger. Such precision unnerved them more than any demon incursion. Now new readings pulsed across the screens, forming patterns too coherent to be random warp bleed. One officer leaned forward, brow knit in disbelief, as he traced the movement's signature across the Manufactorum grid. The anomaly moved with unnatural speed and fluidity, its trajectory marked not by brute force impacts, but by elegant arcs of destruction. Each spike of energy aligned perfectly with the sudden disappearance of hostile warp creatures, as if entire clusters of demons had been erased in moments. The Voxmaster struggled to stabilize auditory feeds coming from scout units near the site. Broken fragments of speech emerged through the static, describing impossible movements, blurred silhouettes, and the sound of rhythmic impacts unlike bolter fire or chainsword strikes. Some voices trembled with fear, others with awe, as if they had witnessed something capable of tearing through the horrors of chaos with surgical grace rather than crude strength. At the center of the room, the commanding officer watched in silent contemplation, his fingers tapping the edge of the tactical table with steady rhythm. His mind sifted through possibilities, none of them comforting. If the anomaly was a demon, it bore none of the traditional signatures. If it was a psyker, its power far exceeded any sanctioned human or xenos recorded in Imperial archives. Its behavior suggested neither madness nor corruption, but intent, control, something far more unsettling. The senior tech priest analyzed the pattern of destruction with metallic calm, mechadendrites whirring softly as they calculated probabilities. The data suggested a single operative, moving between warp entities with ease bordering on artistry, dispatching them with precision incompatible with Imperial training. The tech priest's voice droned through the Vox feed, stating an assessment that rippled through the room like a cold wind. What approached the Manufactorum district was not a threat the Imperium understood, yet it was a threat that destroyed demons as if swatting away insects. The possibility that it might turn its power on Imperial forces weighed heavily on every mind present. Sensors pulsed again, this time revealing movement toward the anomaly. The commanding officer issued the inevitable order with quiet dread, knowing the squad he dispatched walked towards something no Imperial doctrine had prepared them for. The order spread through the Vox network with a solemn clarity, reaching the ears of soldiers stationed along the battered outskirts of the Manufactorum district. The squad designated for reconnaissance moved swiftly, stepping from the relative safety of their checkpoint into the smoke-drenched ruins that awaited them. Their boots sank into layers of shattered metal and scorched stone, each step echoing the weight of duty pressed upon weary shoulders. The air tasted of burnt promesium, mingled with the metallic tang of recent death. They advanced in disciplined formation, lasguns raised, helmets turning in precise arcs as they scanned their surroundings. The Manufactorum spires loomed above them like the skeletal remains of colossal beasts, hollow frames rattling beneath the distant tremors of ongoing conflict. Faint residual energy crackled across the ground, causing the hairs along soldiers' arms to rise beneath their armor. It felt as though they walked through the afterglow of something immense, something that had reshaped the very air before fading just beyond perception. Their sergeant moved at the front, his posture rigid, steps controlled, the rhythm of his breathing steady even as unease tightened the muscles along his jaw. He had served across several war fronts, witnessed horrors that defied the sanity of men, yet the readings reported from this site carried an unfamiliar sharpness. He felt it even now, a presence woven through the air like distant perfume, alluring in its subtlety yet undeniably dangerous. He lifted a hand, signaling a halt as he knelt beside a scorched crater, etched into the earth with almost artistic symmetry. The squad gathered, eyes following the circular groove that marked the arrival point of the anomaly. The edges were smooth, melted in a way that suggested intense heat without explosive force. No weapon in their arsenal created such patterns. No demon descended with such precision. As the sergeant brushed dust away from the crater's rim, the ground vibrated softly, as if still remembering the impact of something powerful yet elegant. A faint residue shimmered along the stone's surface, glowing briefly before fading into the dull gray. They pressed onward, navigating through tangled corridors of broken machinery. Faint scorch marks lined the walls, trailing in sweeping arcs that suggested movement far too fluid for any creature of the warp. Pools of dissolving ichor steamed quietly, releasing thin, toxic vapors that curled upward like pale serpents. The corpses themselves, or what remained of them, were unlike any demons they had previously encountered. Limbs severed with surgical precision, torsos crushed with force beyond human strength, bodies contorted in mid-death as if time had betrayed their motions. One soldier knelt by a twisted heap of demonic flesh, the warped anatomy unrecognizable even by the standards of chaos corruption. He reached toward it but recoiled as the remaining tissue dissolved into vapor. The sergeant steadied him with a firm hand, sensing the fear tightening the lines of the soldier's stance. Their enemy was not a demon, or if it was, it operated by laws far removed from the chaos they understood. Whatever had passed through this region fought with grace instead of madness, precision instead of fury. As they reached the shattered courtyard of a collapsed spire, the air shifted again, brushing against their helmets with the softness of silk. A presence lingered, not malevolent but aware, as though the anomaly watched their approach from just beyond the drifting haze of smoke. The sergeant felt the hairs at the back of his neck rise, a quiet instinct whispering caution. He raised a closed fist, halting his squad in perfect silence. The ruins trembled with a faint rhythm, like footsteps woven from confidence rather than haste. Something moved through the dust, each step deliberate, each pause intentional. The squad tightened their formation, weapons lifted in unified readiness. Shapes stirred within the haze, silhouettes narrowing into something distinctly human yet undeniably other. The witch had noticed them, and the squad realized, with quiet dread, that they were walking toward a presence that had dismantled warp horrors with the serenity of a sculptor shaping clay. The squad froze as the silhouette stepped through the veil of dust, its outline sharpening with each soft footfall. The smoke parted around her as though afraid to cling to her presence, clearing just enough for the guardsmen to see the figure at their center. Bayonetta emerged with the same quiet poise she held upon rising from the crater, her gaze gliding over the soldiers in measured assessment. The flicker of warp-corrupted light in the sky reflected off the metallic lines of her attire, giving her an otherworldly shimmer that set every instinct in the squad on edge. Her movements carried no urgency, no sign of aggression, yet something in her posture whispered of boundless danger. The sergeant tightened his grip on his lasgun, the weapon trembling despite years of discipline hard-earned on battlefields that had broken stronger men. The witch regarded him with faint amusement, as though studying a delicate creature bracing itself before a tide it could not comprehend. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in hostility but in faint curiosity, as if she sensed their fear more clearly than their weapons. The guardsmen spread into a defensive arc, boots grinding against rubble, breath steady but laced with tension. Their weapons tracked her carefully, each muzzle aligned with practiced precision. Bayonetta watched them without raising a hand. Instead, she shifted her weight subtly, the curve of her body drawing faint attention to the effortless balance she held in a world that seemed intent on collapsing beneath its own weight. Even in the ruined manufactorum, she stood like a dancer poised before an unseen orchestra's first note. The silence between them thickened, punctured only by the distant rumble of artillery and the clatter of falling debris. Dust settled on helmets, forming thin gray veils that made the scene feel almost ceremonial. The sergeant's breathing grew louder inside his vox, echoing faintly across the squad's shared channel. His eyes met hers, and for a moment he felt something brush against his thoughts, a quiet curiosity that probed rather than pierced, seeking nothing more than understanding. Bayonetta sensed his fear sharp as a blade, yet beneath that fear was devotion, tightly wound belief in an emperor he had never seen, a faith forged through suffering and repetition. It resonated faintly, an emotion shaped not by malice but by survival. She recognized its purity, even if its structure differed from the world she knew. Her expression softened, a slight tilt of the head acknowledging the bravery that held these men upright against the vast unknown before them. But the guardsmen saw only the shift of an alien force, a movement too controlled, too graceful, belonging to something beyond mortal flesh. One soldier's hands tightened involuntarily, his weapon trembling just enough to betray his nerves. The motion sent ripples of tension through the formation. Several guns steadied in response, clicking softly as fingers brushed triggers. The sergeant hissed a warning through gritted teeth, urging discipline, though his voice quivered beneath the strain. Bayonetta sensed the rising tension as easily as feeling the change in temperature before a storm. She lifted a single hand, palm open, a gesture intended to calm the situation with quiet elegance. Yet the unfamiliarity of her movements stirred renewed panic among the soldiers. A lasgun charge hummed, its power cell priming with a sharp whine. The witch's eyes flicked to the sound, her lips curving into a faint, knowing smile. The air swelled with anticipation, a fragile balance teetering between violence and restraint. In that fragile pause, the ground trembled beneath them, shifting the energy of the moment away from confrontation. A deeper power awakened beyond the ruins, a pulse that rippled through stone and smoke alike. It was not Bayonetta who broke the tension, but the world itself answering to something far more ancient and violent approaching from the storm's fading heart. The tremor rolled through the district in a slow, resonant wave that silenced every breath in the courtyard. Ferrocrete shuddered underfoot, fragments of rubble tumbling from the broken spire walls as if compelled by some distant heartbeat. The guardsmen shifted uneasily, instincts screaming warnings older than their training. Bayonetta turned her gaze toward the horizon, her posture straightening with quiet attentiveness. Something vast pressed against the edges of reality, its presence darkening the sky with each passing second. A low hum emanated from the warp fissure at the far end of the manufactorum, the air trembling around it like a drum skin pulled taut. Residual energies thickened, gathering into swirling eddies that spiraled upward in a deliberate predatory rhythm. Bayonetta recognized the pattern immediately, not from her own world, but from the universal language of ancient predators circling a fresh kill. Her eyes glimmered with faint anticipation, a spark igniting beneath her composed exterior. The guardsmen felt the pressure before they saw the creature. Their breaths shortened, chests tightening under a weight that seemed to settle directly upon their souls. A psychic undertone vibrated through their skulls, a distorted resonance that scraped against the edges of sanity. The youngest soldier dropped to one knee, clutching his helmet as whispers of blood and fury crawled through his mind. The sergeant barked muffled reassurances, but his own voice strained beneath the invisible weight bearing down upon them. The fissure pulsed violently, sending out waves of scorching heat that warped the air into shimmering layers. Then the tear widened with a bone-deep crack, splitting open like a wound that refused to close. From its core erupted a torrent of crimson light, each flare casting monstrous silhouettes across the ruins. Figures writhed within the glow, shapes of horned heads and colossal wings briefly visible before melting back into the swirling mass. The world fell into a hush dense enough to smother sound. Then the greater demon emerged. It stepped through the fissure with deliberate power, each movement shaking the ground in a wide radius. Its frame towered over the manufactorum, muscles bulging beneath armor fused with molten brass. Flames coursed through veins visible beneath cracked skin, illuminating a face sculpted from rage and ancient hatred. Massive wings unfurled from its back, casting shadows that swallowed entire structures beneath their reach. Bayonetta studied the creature with a calm that defied reason, her head tilting slightly as though appraising a sculpture carved from raw fury. She sensed its origins, its connection to a realm where violence pulsed as currency. This being radiated wrath shaped into flesh, its mind a furnace of brutal purpose. Yet beneath that ferocity lay something strangely familiar, a hunger for domination, for proving supremacy through destruction. The demon raised its head toward the sky, releasing a roar that tore through the district with physical force. Shards of shattered glass rained from the upper walls. Guardsmen staggered, shields buckling beneath the sonic assault. The sound passed over Bayonetta like a passing breeze, ruffling the strands of her hair but drawing no fear from her expression. The demon's eyes locked onto her, drawn by the unmistakable presence of another powerful entity. It stepped forward, cracking stone beneath its hooves. The energy between them shifted, heavy with the promise of impending conflict. The universe around them seemed to hold its breath as two forces from different eras, different laws, and different dominions finally faced one another. The demon advanced with a ponderous certainty, each step sinking deep into the ferrocrete. Flames licked along the seams of its armor, dripping molten embers that hissed upon contact with the ground. The entire manufactorum quaked beneath its weight, dust cascading from the fractured structures as though bowing to its presence. Its eyes burned with a crimson intensity, twin furnaces radiating ancient rage as they fixed upon the lone figure who dared stand unmoved before it. Bayonetta inhaled softly, the steady rise of her chest as controlled as every gesture she made. Her heels clicked once against the cracked ground as she stepped forward, greeting the demon's towering presence with the calm poise of one attending an expected meeting. She studied the warpfare flickering across its limbs, noting the strange blend of physical mass and immaterial essence pulsing beneath its skin. There was a rhythm to its power, a cadence shaped by bloodshed and millennia of conflict. The demon struck first. Its massive arm cleaved downward in a brutal arc, claws cleaving through the air with the sound of tearing metal. The wind from the strike blasted outward, sending debris skittering across the courtyard. Bayonetta moved with liquid smoothness, her body sliding sideways as though carried by a whisper of wind. The attack struck empty ground, carving a crater where she had stood just a moment before. Her movements drew a faint snarl from the creature, a rumble vibrating through the broken stone. It lashed out again, this time faster, bringing both arms down with force capable of crushing tanks beneath their weight. Bayonetta stepped into a graceful pirouette, her form bending elegantly beneath the dual strike. Her body twisted in perfect synchrony, each motion deliberate, every evasion a measured stroke in a deadly dance. The demon roared its frustration, flames erupting along its chest as it channeled raw warp energy into a violent pulse. The blast surged outward in a tidal wave of red fire. Bayonetta lifted her arm, and her guns flared with bursts of azure light that countered the heat with concentrated magical force. The wave broke around her, splitting into curling streams that dissipated into ash. She responded with a barrage of her own, her weapons singing in rapid sequence. Each bullet infused with her magic-carved searing lines across the demon's armor. It staggered, not from the pain but from surprise, unfamiliar with an opponent who moved without fear. The witch advanced, bullets marking her steps like notes in an ancient song, each shot echoing through the ruins with steady rhythm. Then the demon lunged, wings beating once in a thunderous crack that sent a shockwave rolling across the courtyard. It propelled itself forward, claws aimed directly at her heart. Bayonetta dodged with perfect timing, and witch time blossomed around her once more. The world slowed into a silent haze as she stepped past the creature's massive form. She leapt upward, heels striking its chin with a force that sent ripples through its molten skin. The demon froze in suspended agony, its roar trapped as a distorted echo within the slowed moment. Bayonetta twisted in midair, a sequence of acrobatic motions that aligned her body above its head. She fired downward with calculated precision, bullets tearing through the demon's skullplate. When time resumed, the impact thundered through the manufactorum. The creature stumbled backward, cracking stone beneath its hooves as it fought to regain balance. Its flames dimmed for a moment, flickering uncertainly as it glared at the witch with renewed fury. Bayonetta landed lightly, adjusting her stance with calm certainty. The demon's next breath came ragged, deeper, hungrier. She sensed the shift before she saw it, the creature drawing upon the warp's depths to renew its strength. It was preparing for a clash far greater than brute strength alone. The demon's renewed roar rippled through the broken spires, shaking loose clouds of dust that drifted downward like ashen snowfall. Its wounded rage twisted into a deeper ferocity, flames spreading outward from its core in spiraling arcs. Bayonetta watched the transformation with a steady gaze, her pulse calm, her posture still untouched by the threat before her. She understood the rhythm of escalating conflict, the way powerful beings responded when their dominance was challenged. The creature's rising fury signaled the need for a shift in her own approach. She lifted her arm with slow precision, letting her fingers trace an arc through the heated air. The shadow at her feet deepened, its edges curling upward like tendrils stirred by an unseen sea. Her hair began to flow as though caught in a silent current, lengths lifting weightlessly as magic threaded through each strand. The ground beneath her shimmered, a circle of elegant markings emerging in delicate detail, glowing faintly in hues of violet and obsidian. The demon recognized the change, sensing the swell of energy building around her. It charged with reckless abandon, determined to strike before her power fully manifested. Its claws scraped the earth, tearing deep furrows as molten sparks scattered in all directions. Bayonetta remained still, a pillar of focus amid the approaching storm. The creature's massive form closed the distance rapidly, its shadow falling over her in a tide of crimson light. Her spell completed with a final whisper of arcane motion. The summoning circle ignited. From its center erupted columns of midnight flame, swirling upward into the likeness of an immense feminine figure. Madama Butterfly emerged with commanding elegance, her colossal form composed of shadowed curves and sharp demonic beauty. Her wings, vast and luminous with violet fire, unfurled behind her, casting the courtyard into trembling shade. Her presence alone shifted the battlefield's atmosphere, replacing the demon's primal fury with ancient, infernal poise. The greater demon faltered mid-charge, stunned by the sudden emergence of a rival force whose essence radiated power older than the warp incursion itself. Madama Butterfly's gaze, twin embers of dark flame, swept across the battlefield with regal dominance. Bayonetta lifted her chin subtly, granting her infernal partner silent command of the engagement. The demoness responded with a slow, deliberate flex of her clawed fingers, her body shimmering with restrained strength. The demon roared and lunged again, shattering its hesitation under the weight of its own wrath. Madama Butterfly caught the strike with one massive hand, her grip locking around the demon's arm with crushing force. The collision of titanic powers shook the ground, cracks spiderwebbing outward from their point of impact. The demon struggled, muscles bulging beneath molten skin, warp fire sputtering with violent intensity. Madama Butterfly leaned forward, her lips curling into a silent, predatory smile. She lifted the demon off the ground with effortless grace, spinning its massive body in a wide arc before slamming it into the earth with enough force to crater the surface. Bayonetta stepped aside, heels tapping softly across the fractured stone, unfazed by the shockwave rippling outward. The demon staggered, trying to rise, but the demoness moved faster. She delivered a crushing kick that sent the creature flying across the courtyard, its body tearing through a ruined wall before skidding into a tangle of smoking debris. Her wings flared, their violet flames painting the ruins in haunting shades of purple as she glided forward to press the advantage. Bayonetta watched with calm satisfaction, her connection to the summoned demon flowing like a shared breath. The battlefield shifted in her favor, the demon's rage meeting the refined brutality of her infernal partner. This was no longer a clash of raw violence, but a choreographed destruction performed by beings shaped for elegance and dominance. And the demon, for all its fury, had stepped into a dance it could not hope to lead. The Manufactorum district lay bathed in trembling violet light as Madama Butterfly delivered blow after blow, each movement sending echoes that rippled through the fractured spires. The guardsmen who had been poised to attack Bayonetta now stood frozen in place, weapons lowered to their sides as disbelief washed over them. Their minds fought to reconcile the impossible sight unfolding before them, trying to understand how a being with the silhouette of a woman commanded a titan forged from demonic beauty and arcane power. The impact of each strike sent waves of dust swirling around the squad, coating their armor in a thin layer of gray. They blinked through the haze, eyes wide behind their visors. Their helmets' auspex displays flickered uselessly, unable to quantify the forces at play. One soldier sank to his knees, overwhelmed by the spectacle, while another clutched his rifle so tightly his knuckles whitened beneath the gloves. The sergeant tried to steady his breathing, but his chest tightened at the sight of the demon, one of Chaos' feared champions, being hurled across the battlefield like discarded scrap. The Imperial Creed had prepared them for demons of the warp, nightmares of corruption and madness that spewed violence without reason. But this was different. The witch before them wielded power with precision, elegance, and purpose. She did not channel rage, nor did she succumb to the chaotic frenzy that marked the warp's spawn. Instead, her presence radiated a calm authority that defied every category the Imperium had known. Her summons did not warp the air with the stench of decay, but with a strange, hypnotic beauty that unsettled even as it enthralled. They watched Madama Butterfly catch the greater demon's charge midair, lifting it above her head with ease. The colossal creature writhed, flames sputtering as it tried to free itself. She twisted gracefully, slamming it into the ground with enough force to fracture the earth. Shockwaves rolled outward, rattling loose panels on distant buildings and sending broken machinery tumbling down from shattered platforms. The demoness stood tall, wings stretching skyward in a display of dominance that eclipsed the demon's fading presence. Bayonetta walked through the scene with calm, measured steps, her gaze following her summon's performance with the attentiveness of a conductor guiding an orchestra through its crescendo. Each motion she made seemed to influence the battlefield, her connection to Madama Butterfly flowing like a quiet stream beneath the chaos. The demon's roars grew weaker, its form flickering as cracks of warplight broke across its surface. The sight forced a rift through the soldiers' understanding of reality. If this witch possessed such power, what hope had mortals against her displeasure? Their emperor was the only being they believed capable of shaping fate on such scale, yet here stood a stranger who fought demons with an artistry that bordered on divine. Their fear mingled with a strange reverence, the kind whispered by pilgrims who claimed to witness visions, visions that changed their understanding of the sacred and the profane. The sergeant lowered his weapon fully, his knees trembling as he fought the instinct to kneel. His mind grappled desperately with doctrine, unsure whether to classify her as a savior, a threat, or a herald of something grander and far more dangerous than anything the Imperium had prepared them for. Bayonetta paused briefly, her gaze drifting across the stunned soldiers with faint acknowledgement. Her eyes softened, not with comfort, but with a quiet awareness of the turmoil she had stirred in these fragile hearts. The demon collapsed behind her, its body dissolving into crimson vapor, marking the end of one battle and the beginning of something far more consequential. Far above the trembling hive, in the hollowed sanctum of a commandeered orbital bastion, the Inquisition watched the unfolding events with sharpening intensity. Vox feeds flickered across layered hololithic screens, each displaying glimpses of the witch who had descended from the warp storm's heart. Every frame froze upon her silhouette, upon the graceful brutality of her strikes, upon the towering demon she commanded with effortless certainty. The room's atmosphere thickened under the weight of unspoken conclusions that none dared to voice. A cluster of inquisitorial adepts worked feverishly, rerouting corrupted data streams and stabilizing psychic recordings. The feeds bled distortion where her power manifested, as though reality itself had recoiled from trying to capture her full form. Each attempt to categorize her energy signature ended in rapid system failure, cogitator spirals collapsing beneath numbers that escalated far beyond sanctioned limits. Tech priests exchanged silent glances, their mechadendrites twitching in agitation. The Inquisitor stood at the center of the chamber, her armor's blackened plates gleaming beneath dim lumen strips. She studied every flicker of Bayonetta's movement, her thoughts running with a cold clarity honed by decades of purging heresy. The witch's power was undeniable. Her elegance masked lethality. Her summons resembled demons, yet carried none of the warp's caustic taint. She fought creatures of chaos with a precision that suggested not corruption, but mastery. That contradiction tightened a knot of suspicion in the Inquisitor's chest. She leaned forward, observing the moment Bayonetta confronted the greater demon. The feed trembled as Madama Butterfly manifested, the demonic silhouette warping the lens with its size. The Inquisitor's augmentic eye zoomed in on Bayonetta's stance, noting the calm, the focus, the mastery that marked her. The thought pressed quietly upon her consciousness. This witch possessed power rivaling alpha-ranked psykers, yet moved untouched by the warp's chaos. That alone made her a threat unlike any the Inquisition had catalogued. Whispers rustled through the chamber as adepts exchanged muted theories. Some speculated she was a new form of xeno-psyker. Others believed she was a demon in human guise. A few dared to consider she might be a weapon forged by an unknown power beyond the warp. None of these explanations soothed the tension that now coiled among them like a serpent beneath cold stone. The Inquisitor raised a hand, silencing every whisper in an instant. A decision formed in her mind with the certainty of a guillotine blade descending. She would confront this witch herself. She would determine the truth behind those calm eyes. Whether ally or enemy, the Imperium could not ignore a presence capable of upending the balance of power upon a single world. The witch had revealed her strength. Now the Inquisition would reveal its resolve. Smoke drifted in slow ribbons above the Manufactorum ruins as Bayonetta stepped through the lingering haze, her heels striking the ground in soft, deliberate rhythm. The echoes of her earlier battle faded into the distance, replaced by the steady hum of a wounded hive trying to breathe through layers of dust and decay. She moved toward the city's interior, drawn by the pulsing life that thrummed beneath its metal skin. The ruins gave way to broader walkways, each one lined with towering structures shaped by centuries of labor and war. The hive city loomed around her like a colossal cathedral of industry. Endless spires rose into the dim sky, their silhouettes jagged against the lingering remnants of the warp storm. Iron buttresses arched overhead, casting long shadows across corridors choked with cables, rusted machinery, and flickering lumen strips that sputtered as she passed. The air tasted metallic and stale, a mixture of exhaust fumes, incense, and desperation woven into the fabric of every breath. Civilians drifted through the lower levels with haunted eyes, their movements slow and mechanical, shaped by exhaustion and survival. They froze when they caught sight of her, gazes widening with a mixture of awe and fear. Some stepped aside, pressing themselves into alcoves, whispering prayers under their breath. Others simply stared, their minds struggling to place this elegant figure within the rigid confines of their understanding. Bayonetta felt their emotions lightly, like a distant melody drifting across still water. Their fear was sharp, raw, yet tinged with admiration. She studied their devotion to an unseen emperor, the reverence they carried in their postures, the fatigue etched into their faces. This world lived in constant tension, held together by faith and force, its people burdened by a weight they had long accepted as unchangeable. She paused before a shattered shrine embedded into a wall of cracked stone. Candles flickered weakly around a bronze depiction of the emperor, the once majestic carving dulled by centuries of soot. Bayonetta reached out, brushing a finger near the edge of the statue, sensing the intensity of belief crystallized within this place. It was a devotion unlike anything she had encountered, not soft or celebratory, but desperate, clinging to hope through unending bloodshed. Further along, she passed fields of servo skulls floating like silent sentinels, their red lenses tracking her with mechanical caution. Children peeked from behind reinforced doors, eyes wide with fascination before being pulled back by trembling guardians. The hive breathed around her, watching her every step with quiet tension. Bayonetta absorbed the details with calm curiosity, her thoughts moving like silk threads weaving through unfamiliar tapestry. This world was harsh, relentless, and yet beautiful in its own fractured way. A sense of expectation coiled in the air ahead, faint but unmistakable. Something powerful was searching for her, drawn by the wake of energy she left behind. The witch continued forward, knowing the encounter would find her soon enough. The first sign came as a change in the atmosphere, a tightening of the air as if the hive itself tensed in anticipation. Bayonetta felt it settling across her shoulders like a cloak of cold shadow, the weight growing heavier with each step she took deeper into the cathedral district. The lumen strips flickered violently, struggling to hold their light against an approaching force that radiated authority rather than chaos. She recognized the pattern instantly, mortals steeped in purpose, armored in conviction sharper than any blade. The cathedral rose before her in a sweep of Gothic architecture, its monumental arches carved with depictions of battles long forgotten. Statues of angelic warriors lined the entrance, their faces eroded by time and unending worship. Bayonetta ascended the cracked steps with the serenity of one attending a quiet ceremony. Her heels clicked softly across the vast stone floor as she moved through rows of pews shattered by bombardments from a distant conflict. She paused near the center, the colossal statue of the emperor casting its shadow across her figure. The air vibrated with incoming movement. Stormtroopers advanced through each entrance with synchronized precision, their armor reflecting the crimson glow filtering through the stained glass windows. Their boots struck the ground in perfect unison, forming a ring of black and white around her. The Inquisitor entered last, her presence heavy with authority and sharpened resolve. Her armor gleamed beneath a cloak lined with sigils and purity seals, each one fluttering like tattered prayers. Augmetic lenses scanned Bayonetta's silhouette from head to heel, analyzing the faint pulses of magic drifting from her presence. Her gaze carried the weight of someone who had witnessed souls crumble beneath interrogation and demons burn beneath consecrated flame. Bayonetta remained still, a calm figure in the center of a tightening snare. Her gaze slid over the stormtroopers' raised weapons, over the Inquisitor's outstretched hand commanding silence. Their formation was impeccable, their devotion absolute, their fear carefully buried yet still detectable, trembling beneath their armor like the faint quiver of a drawn bowstring. The atmosphere crackled with unspoken challenge. The cathedral's sacred walls absorbed the tension, the flicker of lumens casting ghost-like patterns across the witch's silhouette. She felt the stormtroopers' anticipation, their certainty that the moment demanded submission. But she sensed something deeper beneath the Inquisitor's stillness, a mind calculating possibilities with every breath, measuring the danger before her with respect instead of panic. Bayonetta shifted her weight slightly, the subtle motion carrying the calm confidence of one who had danced through divine battles in stranger realms. The Inquisitor's breath hitched, the slightest crack in her otherwise perfect composure. The air held steady, dense, with the inevitability of conflict. And then a tremor far beyond the cathedral walls whispered the arrival of a new threat rising from the sky above, pulling the moment toward a different kind of confrontation. The tremor faded, but its warning clung to the air like an unspoken omen. Inside the cathedral, the stormtroopers tightened their formation, their stance shifting as if preparing to contain a force they barely understood. Bayonetta felt their tension resonating through the stone floor, a sharp contrast to her own tranquil poise. Her gaze drifted upward briefly, catching the glimmer of fractured light filtering down from shattered stained glass windows. Colors bled across her features like shifting tides, reflecting the ripple of magic that shimmered faintly beneath her skin. A single movement broke the stillness. A stormtrooper stepped forward, raising his weapon with the certainty of a man acting under sacred command. The hum of its power cell throbbed into the air, joining a chorus of similar sounds as the others followed suit. Their barrels aligned in a perfect ring of lethal focus, all pointed toward one slender figure standing in the heart of the cathedral. Bayonetta watched them without flinching, her expression calm as the edges of her hair swayed gently in the ambient air. The Inquisitor advanced, her boots striking the stone floor with a resonant cadence. Her voice carried quiet authority, but Bayonetta sensed the tremor of uncertainty beneath it. She could feel the woman's mind, disciplined, hardened, yet not immune to the awe stirred by the witch's presence. Intent shimmered in the air, thick and unavoidable. The Inquisitor demanded compliance through posture alone, extending a gauntleted hand in a gesture meant to contain or bind. Bayonetta tilted her head slightly, watching the gesture with a measured softness. Her eyes narrowed by a fraction as she sensed the rising tide of command poised to turn into violence. The soldiers tightened their grips, their breathing grew heavier. Fear expanded like a cold fog behind their visors. Then the first shot fired. The burst of red light streaked toward her, cutting through the dim cathedral air. Bayonetta shifted with barely a murmur of motion, letting the bolt pass harmlessly beside her cheek. Another shot followed, then another, until the air pulsed with lines of lethal crimson converging from every angle. Time slowed, not in full witch time's embrace, but in the heightened clarity of her awareness. Her body flowed between strikes like ink spreading through water. She bent backward in an elegant arc, balancing on one heel as bolts carved paths above her. Her arms extended outward, guiding her movement in sweeping balletic rhythm. She stepped sideways, avoiding shots by inches, each evasion executed with effortless grace. The stormtroopers grew desperate, their volleys becoming frantic beneath her untouchable flow. With a single upward sweep of her arm, Bayonetta redirected the next bolt with a flick of magical force, sending it spiraling back toward the nearest soldier. It struck his armor, sending him crumpling to the ground. Weapons clattered as others recoiled. She advanced with serene precision, disarming them with flicks of her heel-mounted guns, sending firearms spinning across the stone floor. The Inquisitor watched in stunned silence, the cathedral trembling beneath the clash of mortal force and otherworldly finesse. Her wards ignited, psychic barriers flickering as she attempted to command control of the confrontation. Bayonetta approached slowly, her steps soft yet resolute. The air shifted again, not with aggression, but with her presence settling like calm before a second storm. The witch had not come to kill them, but she would not kneel. Silence reclaimed the cathedral in the aftermath of the clash, broken only by the crackling of damaged lumens and the soft groans of stormtroopers attempting to rise. Dust floated through the air in drifting spirals, settling around Bayonetta as she walked with measured steps toward the heart of the formation. Her movements remained fluid, devoid of haste, as though the confrontation had been no more than a brief interruption to her curiosity. The Inquisitor steadied herself, her armor dented at the shoulder where psychic backlash had struck her during the exchange. She lifted her chin with rigid defiance, though the faint tremble beneath her breathing betrayed the fracture in her confidence. Bayonetta approached her with the calm certainty of a predator choosing not to strike, her gaze focused, yet lacking the cruelty that shaped so many beings in this war-torn galaxy. She halted within arm's reach, the quiet between them thick with tension. The cathedral's stained windows cast fractured beams of crimson and gold across her silhouette, reflecting the lingering shimmer of the magic that still clung to her form. Her presence pulsed with a soft power, a warning carried not by threat but by unshakable certainty. the Inquisitor's mind raced, calculating outcomes, searching for a foothold in a situation far beyond her usual dominion. Bayonetta lifted a hand to brush dust from her shoulder, the gesture delicate enough to contrast sharply with the devastation surrounding her. Her expression shifted subtly, something cool, deliberate, and implacable settling behind her eyes. She spoke with her posture, with the quiet weight of her presence. The message flowed toward the Inquisitor like velvet over tempered steel. She would not be hunted. She would not be bound. She would answer aggression with precision, not cruelty, but with a force that even the Inquisition could not contain. The Inquisitor felt the warning as though Bayonetta had carved it directly into the air between them. Her breath caught, a flicker of realization dawning across her features. This witch had no interest in serving chaos, nor in kneeling to the Imperium. She walked her own path, unfazed by their rituals or authority, yet she had shown restraint, a mercy rarely granted by beings of comparable strength. The stormtroopers remained still, their weapons scattered across the stone floor. None dared move as Bayonetta turned away, her heels echoing across the cathedral in calm rhythm. She paused once more, glancing toward the distant city beyond the shattered doors. A tide of energy swelled in the distance, darker and far more violent than the tension behind her. The warning she had given the Inquisition hung suspended in the air, like a finely drawn blade. Beyond the cathedral, a new presence stirred, the kind that turned war zones into extinction grounds. Bayonetta felt it approaching with quiet inevitability. And her next steps moved toward that rising threat, leaving the Inquisitor to contemplate the delicate boundary between ally and executioner. The warning reached Bayonetta not through sound or sight, but through the subtle shift of the world's pulse. The air quivered, carrying the unmistakable vibration of an approaching cataclysm. She paused in the cathedral's threshold, letting the sensation settle across her senses like a second skin. Beyond the horizon, the warp storm that had delivered her into this relentless universe stirred once more, its dying embers reigniting with malignant purpose. The sky above Mortia's prime twisted in slow spirals, clouds dragged into spiraling vortexes as streaks of warp fire tore across the atmosphere. Hazy red light flooded the streets, casting long skeletal shadows through the tall spires. Civilians clung to one another in the alleyways, their eyes lifted toward the heavens in silent dread. The distant hum of Imperial defenses rose like a desperate chant as Void Shield arrays strained to life. Then the first break appeared. A tear split across the heavens, long and jagged, bleeding crimson light like an open wound. Moments later, hulking silhouettes pushed through the rift, one after another. The Chaos Fleet emerged in solemn procession, each warship a monument to 10,000 years of malice, their twisted hulls etched with runes carved from suffering and devotion to ancient gods. A battle cruiser led the formation, its prow shaped like a screaming visage, maws of cannons lining its flanks. Smaller warships circled around it like carrion birds drawn to fresh ruin. The fleet's engines glowed with sickly luminescence, their trails dripping streaks of warp residue that burned through the upper atmosphere. The roar of their arrival shook the Hive City's foundations, sending vibrations through ferrocrete floors and rattling rusted pipes. Drop pods soon followed, streaking downward like burning meteors. Dozens became hundreds, trailing fiery lines through the sky as they plunged toward the Hive's upper levels. Chaos Marines, forged by hatred and corruption, prepared to descend in numbers formidable enough to shatter entire regiments of Imperial defenders. Their war cries echoed faintly even before they breached the atmosphere, each drop pod vibrating with ancient hunger. Bayonetta stepped forward into the open courtyard, her hair stirring as the shockwaves reached her position. The presence of the warp-touched legion brushed against her mind with scorching pressure, demanding attention through sheer brutish force. She felt their bloodlust, their disciplined cruelty, the cold purpose etched into their souls. The witch exhaled softly, her gaze rising toward the fleet. A faint smile curved at the corner of her lips, the expression calm and resolute. Another battle approached, not of elegance alone, but of ferocity shaped by the wills of beings who had dedicated millennia to destruction. Above her, the sky raged with the arrival of chaos. And she moved forward, drawn toward the oncoming storm with unshaken grace. The first drop pods struck the hive's upper platforms with the force of artillery shells, their exteriors hissing as thermal plating cooled against the frigid wind. Explosive bolts fired, doors slammed open. Chaos Marines emerged in disciplined waves, their armor scorched black and brass, sigils glowing like embers of old hatred. Each warrior carried the weight of unrelenting purpose, their movements precise, driven not by desperation, but by ritualized violence perfected over millennia. Imperial defenses scrambled to respond. Barricades crackled with lasgun fire, heavy bolters roared from elevated positions, and Vox orders echoed with strained resolve. Yet the defenders knew the truth that weighed on every soul. This was not a battle they could win through discipline alone. The Chaos Marines advanced through withering fire without slowing, their armor deflecting rounds, their chainswords igniting in brutal arcs. Bayonetta moved through the chaos like a whisper of shadowed elegance. She stepped across broken pathways, heels clicking softly, her eyes calm amidst the violence. She sensed the desperation clinging to the soldiers, a heavy fog of fear and determination that wrapped around their spirits like chains. Yet beneath it all, she found a spark that reminded her of other worlds, other battles, humans clinging to life with fragile courage. A squad of Chaos Marines broke through a defensive line ahead. Their bolters fired in thunderous bursts, shredding defenses and sending men scrambling for cover. Bayonetta's body shifted before the shots reached her. She blurred forward with feline swiftness, her form bending around the incoming rounds as if guided by instinct older than memory. In an instant, she appeared before the nearest Marine, her leg rising in an elegant arc. Her heel struck the helm, denting the corrupted ceramite with ease before sending the hulking warrior sprawling backward. The Imperial soldiers witnessed the strike with stunned disbelief. The witch flowed through the enemy ranks, firing precise shots from her guns, each bullet tearing through joints and visor slits with unerring accuracy. Chaos Marines fell beneath combinations of acrobatic strikes and shimmering bullets, their bodies hitting the ground in thunderous crashes. Bayonetta did not linger. She moved ahead, carving a path through the invaders, pushing back their advance through sheer momentum. She stepped lightly across a collapsing walkway, springing upward into a twist that sent her spinning through the air. At the apex of her ascent, she unleashed a storm of magical bullets, the projectiles tracing lines of azure light across the battlefield. The Chaos Marines staggered under the barrage, thrown off balance by a force they were unprepared to counter. Imperial defenders seized the moment, rallying behind the unexpected champion who fought with the elegance of a dancer and the ferocity of a living weapon. Across the hive's upper levels, hope flickered anew. Bayonetta had become the Imperium's shield, whether they welcomed her or feared her. The hive's upper districts spiraled into chaos as the invading forces pressed deeper into the labyrinthine architecture. Towering walkways collapsed under the weight of battle, and flames poured from ruptured pipelines, illuminating the metallic caverns in flickering waves of orange and gold. Smoke hung thick between spires like a choking fog, curling around broken archways and shattered lifts. From every direction came the roar of gunfire, the clash of steel, and the distant bellow of demonic engines stalking the streets. Bayonetta moved through the labyrinth with quiet precision. Each step carried her from shadow to vantage point, her senses attuned to the shifting tide of violence around her. She felt chaos forces closing in from every angle, their movements synchronized with brutal efficiency. Chainswords revved in the distance, accompanied by the rhythmic clatter of armored boots striking metal platforms. Her form shimmered, changing with the needs of the battlefield. One breath carried her forward as a sleek black panther, claws digging into the ferrocrete as she sprinted across vertical walls with impossible speed. She dashed beneath collapsing scaffolding, weaving through tight corridors where Chaos Marines attempted to ambush Imperial defenders. Her body shifted back to human form in mid-leap, guns flashing in bright arcs as she descended upon unsuspecting invaders. When enemy snipers emerged on elevated catwalks, her silhouette dissolved into black feathers. A crow glided effortlessly through the storm of bullets, cutting across the burning skyline. She soared between ruined towers, landing upon an exposed beam with a grace so quiet it seemed to silence the wind. A single shot ended the threat, her aim precise even in the chaos. A swirl of steam enveloped her as she slipped into a narrow sewage artery. Her body transformed once more, stretching into the serpentine fluidity of a snake. She glided through the pipelines, emerging behind a chaos warband, preparing to flank a defending guard company. The transformation dissolved, revealing her form just as she unleashed a barrage that toppled the ambushers in seconds. She moved like water through stone, adapting to each challenge with instinctive mastery. Every transformation flowed into the next with seamless grace, her magic weaving through the chaos like a soft echo of something ancient and untamed. Imperial soldiers watched with awe as she mounted the ruins of a collapsed skybridge, silhouette framed against the burning skyline. She raised her arm as a beast engine barreled around a corner, its maw dripping molten metal. Her hair stirred, gathering into a tight weave of shadow. A massive fist of magical energy erupted beside her, smashing the engine into molten debris. Momentum shifted. The Imperials rallied, emboldened by her presence. The witch carved through the battlefield, reshaping the city's fate with each step. And the war responded, preparing a greater test just beyond the next broken horizon. The deeper Bayonetta moved into the hive's heart, the thicker the air became, saturated with a presence far heavier than the scattered warbands she had already confronted. She sensed it pulsing through the fractured metal beneath her heels, a commanding aura forged through millennia of conquest and shaped by the unending hunger of the warp. It resonated with disciplined cruelty, the sort that silenced lesser beings through its existence alone. She ascended a twisted walkway that overlooked a massive courtyard shattered by recent bombardments. Fires crackled along the edges, casting long shadows through the drifting haze. Among them, a single armored figure stepped forward with a measured stride. The Chaos Lord's armor, shaped by centuries of corruption, gleamed with brass and obsidian plates etched with runic scars. His helm bore the mark of his warband, a snarling visage that glared with malevolent authority. His presence struck the air like a hammer upon an anvil. Even the fires shrank back. Bayonetta paused, studying him with quiet interest. The warp energy seeping from his armor clung to the air, distorting its temperature and tinting the light with sickly undertones. He exuded power, but not the wild fury of demons. This was calculated, sharpened, and honed through unending warfare. His armored boots crushed broken stone as he approached, body language heavy with challenge. The courtyard trembled from the weight of his movements. Imperial survivors scrambled back, sensing the gravity of the confrontation building like a storm ready to break. The Chaos Lord raised his weapon, a jagged blade infused with dark energy that hummed with violent promise. Bayonetta's hair lifted slightly in the heated wind, her stance shifting into the poised readiness of a dancer at the edge of a grand performance. Their auras collided in the silent space between them, a pressure so dense it distorted the smoke curling through the air. He charged first. His blade cleaved downward, carving a molten arc through the ground. Bayonetta slipped aside in a swirl of motion, her guns appearing in her hands through a shimmer of magic. She fired point-blank, each bullet laced with arcane burn. The Lord staggered but held firm, his armor absorbing the impact with furious defiance. He retaliated with a flurry of savage strikes, each blow capable of cutting tanks in half. She wove between the attacks, her movement artful and fluid, never clashing strength against strength, always guiding his momentum into failure. Their battle spilled through the courtyard in a cascade of sparks, magic, and molten ceramite. Each impact marked the meeting of two forces shaped by entirely different universes. And neither was ready to yield. The Chaos Lord's onslaught intensified, each strike digging trenches through the shattered courtyard. His presence radiated volatile fury, the air warping around him as the warp fed his rage with unrestrained vigor. Yet Bayonetta remained composed, her form twisting elegantly around his blows, each step measured, each pivot precise. Her guns flashed in rhythmic bursts, carving glowing marks across the corrupted armor. Still, the Lord advanced, undeterred, driven by a will hardened across 10,000 years of war. Bayonetta sensed the shift, the moment when battle transitioned from trial to necessity. Her fingers tightened on her weapons, not in desperation but in heightened focus. The Lord's blade carved a vertical arc inches from her face, the heat brushing her cheek. She stepped back lightly, letting the force of his attack carry him forward. Her hair lifted in the rising pressure, strands unwinding with deliberate grace. The time had come. She moved into a sweeping motion, her body arching in an elegant spiral as her feet traced a circle across the stone. The ground beneath her ignited with signature markings, lines of violet light spreading outward in a precise pattern. Shadows gathered at her heels, thickening as her magic pulled at the fabric of the realm. The Chaos Lord halted, sensing the surge. His armor crackled with defensive wards as he braced for whatever came next. The courtyard dimmed. Even the fires seemed to shrink, their light drained by the summoning's gravity. Bayonetta's silhouette lifted from the ground, suspended as her hair unraveled into long, flowing ribbons. The circle erupted. Gamora burst from the summoning with thunderous force, a towering draconic beast of obsidian scales and infernal flame. Its maw opened in a soundless roar that consumed the air, its eyes glowing like molten cores. The creature's emergence tore cracks through the stone, sending shockwaves that toppled nearby ruins. Its wings stretched wide, eclipsing the battlefield in monstrous shadow. The Chaos Lord reacted instantly. He charged with bellowing fury, blade raised to strike, but Gamora moved faster. The beast lunged, claws slamming into the ground with devastating force, propelling itself toward the armored champion. Bayonetta guided the demon through subtle motions, her connection to it flowing like a shared heartbeat. Gamora's jaws snapped shut around the Lord's blade arm, crushing ceramite with ease. The Lord roared, striking the demon's snout with waves of warp-infused strength, but his blows landed like raindrops against stone, unable to match the overwhelming force of the summoned titan. Bayonetta raised her arm, her magic threading into Gamora's form. The beast reared back, then drove the Chaos Lord into the ground with a crushing bite. Flames erupted from the impact, consuming corrupted armor and warp flesh alike. The courtyard shook, metal beams collapsing from the sheer violence of the strike. The Chaos Lord vanished beneath the infernal force, reduced to molten remnants swallowed by Gamora's hunger. The demon roared its triumph, wings unfurling wide. And Bayonetta lowered her arm gently, guiding the beast into fading shadow until only silence remained. The echo of its departure lingered like a final, resonant promise of her power. The courtyard settled into a trembling hush as Gamora vanished into dissipating shadow, the last flickers of infernal flame curling upward like dying embers. The stones still quivered beneath Bayonetta's heels, carrying the echo of the Titan's devastating final strike. Smoke drifted in thin coils from the molten crater where the Chaos Lord had fallen, the air saturated with the metallic scent of scorched ceramite and warp flesh. Above the hive, the tone of the battlefield shifted. The Chaos Fleet faltered, their formations breaking unevenly across the sky. Vox transmissions aboard their corrupted vessels erupted into frenzied discord as their commander's psychic signature dissolved into nothingness. Bayonetta felt the ripple of confusion spreading through their ranks like cracks through ancient glass. It revealed hesitation in minds shaped for relentless assault, hesitation that spread with startling speed. One by one, the drop pod trajectories wavered, several aborting their descent entirely. Warbands scattered across the hive received fractured orders, many contradicting the last. Chaos Marines who had fought with unwavering brutality moments earlier now staggered, glancing toward the sky as if awaiting direction that would no longer come. The warp itself trembled with uncertainty, its fickle nature recoiling from the sudden void of leadership. The Imperials sensed the shift. Guard units that had been moments from collapse steadied themselves, their morale rising as the enemy lost cohesion. Artillery batteries roared from distant spires, targeting retreating formations with renewed purpose. Even the city's failing void shields flickered more brightly, ignited by the faint surge of hope kindling among defenders who dared believe the impossible. Bayonetta stood at the courtyard's center, her posture relaxed yet attentive. She watched the slow unraveling of Chaos's assault with a quiet understanding. Victory had not come through their fear of the Imperium, but through the absence of the force that defined their cruelty and unity. The Lord's death had scattered them like embers lifted from a fading pyre. A gust of wind swept through the ruins, carrying the echo of retreating roars and the distant wail of failing warp engines. Chaos ships pulled away from their positions, slipping back toward the storm that had birthed them. Their withdrawal left fractures of fire across the sky, wounds in the atmosphere sealing themselves with reluctant resignation. Imperial defenders emerged from shattered fortifications, stepping cautiously into the open as the final echoes of battle faded. Their eyes found the witch standing amidst ruins and molten stone. Some stared with awe, others with fear, but all recognized the truth heavy in the air. This victory belonged to her. Bayonetta brushed a fleck of ash from her shoulder, the battlefield's smoke swirling around her in a quiet farewell. The retreating roar of the fleet faded into the horizon, leaving behind a world broken but breathing. And in that fragile silence, a new tension began to rise. The Hive City exhaled a long, weary breath as the last Chaos vessels vanished into the storm's fading edges. Fires continued to burn through the upper levels, their glow casting streaks of gold along the battered walls. Emergency klaxons wailed in distant corridors, echoing like mournful hymns through the metallic caverns of the wounded metropolis. Smoke drifted through the air in pale ribbons, carrying the scent of destruction and survival in equal measure. Bayonetta walked through the aftermath with steady grace, her steps weaving between broken barricades and shattered armor. The remains of battle lingered everywhere, bodies of Chaos Marines dissolved into blackened pits, twisted debris scattered across walkways, shattered statues lying in pieces at the cathedral's base. Imperial soldiers moved through the ruins with cautious reverence, glancing her way with expressions that wavered between gratitude and dread. Their thoughts pressed against her senses like faint ripples, revealing the conflict simmering beneath the surface. To some, she was a miracle, an enigmatic savior who had turned the tide no mortal force could have resisted. To others, she was a weapon too powerful, too unpredictable, too detached from the Emperor's light to be considered anything but a threat. Fear and admiration braided tightly together, forming a knot that would not easily unravel. Bayonetta felt neither pride nor concern. She walked as one who had seen countless worlds struggle under their own contradictions. The Imperium's fear belonged not to her, but to their own fragility. Their devotion to a distant ruler had shaped them into a people prepared to worship or condemn with equal fervor. She understood the pattern, even if she did not share its foundations. Closer to the cathedral, a cluster of ranking officers argued in tense whispers. Their armor bore fresh scorch marks, their expressions hardened by conflict. Some argued for containment, insisting the witch represented a danger greater than anything chaos had thrown at them. Others urged caution, reminding their peers that without her intervention, the hive would now lie in ruins beneath a tide of demonic devastation. The Inquisitor remained silent, gaze fixed upon Bayonetta as she approached. Her mind churned beneath a calm exterior, weighing doctrine against necessity. She had witnessed Bayonetta's composure, her restraint, her deliberate precision. Yet she had also witnessed power beyond classification, power that unbalanced the scales of imperial order. Bayonetta paused before them, sensing their turmoil with unbroken serenity. The tension thickened, settling into the air like dust. This world had been saved, but its convictions had been shaken. And balance, once disturbed, always sought new shape. The fires across the hive dimmed into smoldering embers as dawn crept upon the horizon, its pale light filtering through the colossal spires in thin, fractured beams. Bayonetta stepped onto an elevated platform overlooking the city, her gaze drifting across the landscape shaped by war and resilience. The air carried a quiet stillness, broken only by the distant clang of repair crews and the faint hum of cooling machinery. Beneath the destruction lay a pulse of life determined to endure. She felt the weight of the Imperium's eyes upon her, not in hostility but in expectation. Soldiers, priests, officers, and citizens all waited with hushed uncertainty, wondering whether the witch would remain or vanish into whatever realm she called home. Their fear had softened, thinned by the memory of how she had faced demons without hesitation. Yet reverence alone could not quell the unease born from witnessing the impossible. Bayonetta crossed her arms lightly, her hair swaying in the muted wind. She considered the fractured skyline, the imposing architecture built through centuries of suffering and obedience. This world was unlike the realms she had danced through before, grim, rigid, and ruled by faith as unyielding as steel. Yet there was something compelling woven into its harsh lines, a stubbornness she recognized in the humans who had fought despite insurmountable odds. She sensed the Inquisitor's presence approaching, the woman's steps firm but no longer driven by confrontation. The tension that once crackled between them had softened, reshaped by necessity and the witch's undeniable impact upon the war. The air around them carried unspoken questions, heavy with implications that extended far beyond the single hive. Bayonetta did not fear the answer they sought. She understood that her arrival had stirred the gaze of entities far greater than these mortals, forces within the warp shifting with curiosity, ancient beings contemplating the intersection of two universes. The path ahead would not be simple, nor without conflict, but she felt no desire to retreat. There was intrigue here, threads worth pulling, mysteries worth unraveling. Her decision rose within her like a calm tide. She would remain. Not for their sake, not for obligation, but for curiosity, and perhaps something deeper, something almost nostalgic in the struggle of a world refusing to bow to oblivion. The Imperium waited for a declaration they could understand. Bayonetta gave them only her presence, steady and unyielding. And the galaxy felt the ripples of that choice. The hive returned to silence as the sun climbed above the ruins, illuminating the scars left by battle in stark relief. Smoke curled upward from distant craters, drifting lazily toward the narrowing edges of the retreating warp storm. For a brief moment, the world seemed suspended, caught between the aftermath of devastation and the fragile promise of recovery. But beneath this quiet, the galaxy stirred with awareness. Bayonetta stood atop a shattered balcony, her silhouette outlined against the pale glow of dawn. She gazed toward the heavens, sensing the faint tremors of distant minds stretching across the void. The warp pulsed faintly, carrying whispers shaped by ancient hunger. Entities older than empires turned their attention toward the anomaly who had stepped into their game uninvited. Their curiosity brushed against her senses like cold fingers tracing the edge of a blade. She understood the significance of her arrival. This universe moved not in gentle rhythm, but in cycles of war and ruin. Every action echoed across the stars, every disturbance rippling through layers of reality. The death of a Chaos Commander had already shifted power balances within the warp. Lords of Darkness reeled from the disruption, their servants scrambling to adjust their schemes. Some regarded her with fascination, others with resentment. All would eventually seek to challenge or claim her. Below, the Imperium moved with renewed urgency. The Inquisition's agents gathered fragments of data, piecing together reports that defied their doctrines. High-ranking officials whispered behind closed doors, debating whether she was a weapon to be feared or a force to be courted. Their uncertainty radiated through their psychic presence, a storm of apprehension she sensed even from this height. Bayonetta breathed in the cold air, letting it fill her with a calm anticipation. She felt no dread, only interest. The galaxy's secret stretched before her like an unopened tome, its pages waiting to be read, its dangers offering the promise of battles worthy of her skill. She welcomed the attention that now followed her across the warp. It meant her presence had not gone unnoticed. Far above, beyond the veil of the material realm, the immaterium churned. Shapes coiled through its depths, beings forged from chaos, fate, and emotion. One such presence lingered longest, observing her with a focus that pierced through worlds. Its curiosity carried weight enough to shake lesser minds into madness. Bayonetta lifted her chin slightly, sensing the gaze. A faint smile curved at the corner of her lips, not an invitation, but acknowledgement. The witch had entered their domain. The galaxy would shift, and whatever moved next would meet her with the same calm certainty she carried into every battle. The future awaited, shaped by her steps, her power, and the quiet storm she now embodied. If you hunger for more tales of impossible encounters in the dark millennium, smash that subscribe button, and the Emperor protects those who support the channel.